Well, what I might do, it's Rosalind Princely here. I'm the Head of Strategic Research Initiatives with the Deputy Vice Chancellor. And what I think we might do is start now. So welcome to those of you that are here so far. And this is actually a really important workshop, the ANU Below Zero Emissions Workshop on removing greenhouse gases. But before we start the discussion, just while we're waiting for everyone else to log on, we're going to watch a short introduction to the Below Zero consultation process from the ANU Chief Operating Officer, Paul Duldig. And this will also give people time to log into the call, as I've said. So Juliet, how about we put the video on?
Hi, I'm Paul Duldig, Chief Operating Officer at the Australian National University. I'd like to welcome you to the ANU Below Zero consultation. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. As we're all too aware, after the unprecedented bushfires, air pollution and heat that affected much of our east coast last summer, and with fire now wreaking havoc up and down the west coast of the US, climate change is already having devastating impacts all over the world. As a world leader in many areas of climate and energy research, ANU hosts over 450 climate and energy researchers and runs over 130 climate and energy related courses across the university. Our research and education programs are leading the way in developing solutions to the challenges that climate change presents. As the national university, ANU has also a responsibility to lead the nation in line with the world's best practice on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. However, at the moment, ANU activities are contributing to climate change through the direct and indirect emission of significant quantities of greenhouse gases. Further to this, simply reducing our emissions to net zero is no longer enough to maintain a safe and stable climate. To keep global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and if possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we'll also need to draw down and store or use greenhouse gases. In February, the ANU Council passed a resolution recognising the urgency of action required to address climate change. They also committed us to reducing the university's greenhouse gas footprint to below zero through its own operations. The resulting ANU Below Zero initiative is a vital strategic priority for ANU. It is a strong demonstration of our integrity, our emphasis on societal transformation, and our commitment to excellence in everything we do. With the university's extremely difficult financial situation, this consultation process is taking place at a very challenging time. Despite the stress that ANU is under, I'm proud that we are not shying away from developing this initiative. After all, we'll be dealing with the impacts of climate change long after COVID has passed. But there's no doubt that COVID-19 and our financial situation makes the operating environment for this initiative more difficult. Transitioning the university to below zero emissions is no small task. We'll need to look at every aspect of the way that we operate. We'll need to reconsider everything from how we integrate greenhouse gas implications into our decision-making, to how we use energy, how we travel, what we buy, and what we eat. That's why I'm calling on all of you to engage with this vital mission. Here at ANU, we have an incredible brains trust. I encourage all of you to contribute your ideas based on your personal perspectives, as well as your research and professional expertise, to help us transition to become a below zero emissions university as rapidly as possible. I look forward to your contributions soon. Thank you.
So thank you, Paul, in absentia. I think that was a very good introduction to the day and the importance that the university puts on this initiative. Again, for those people that have just joined, I'm Rosalind Princely. I'm Head of Strategic Research Initiatives with the Deputy Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation. And I'm here to facilitate the discussion today. Before I begin, and thank you for joining us today, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands of which we are all meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past and present and future. I'm actually on Ngunnawal land at the moment, as you can see in my background, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Just so you know, this workshop is being recorded and it's going to be shared. Obviously, it's very important to capture what we discuss in these workshops. So if you do not want your comments recorded, please can you submit them anonymously in the chat or just email them to below0@anu.edu.au at any time. That's below zero with no space. So just as Paul explained, the ANU Council's passed this resolution on climate change, calling for urgent action to reduce ANU contributions. And the Vice Chancellor has announced that ANU will go below zero emissions as soon as possible. So that's why we're here today. And this is an opportunity for all of you to participate and contribute to this process in a very meaningful way. We're looking forward to hearing from you what your ideas are to help ANU achieve its goals. The consultation's open till the 20th of October, and you can contribute to the consultation in two ways. This is one of the ways through this workshop, and this is the fourth in a series of 7 workshops, each discussing a different theme. Today's theme is ways in which to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, and I can see in the ideas board that some people have already been thinking about this, which is great. Besides these workshops, you can actually share more of your ideas and interact with other ideas on Idea Note. And the links and instructions on how to join are in the chat. In fact, if you click the tab called Chat, you'll find these. The chat window also contains other links, including registering for upcoming workshops and access to the recordings of the ones already passed, which I'm sure you would be very interested in. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about how to actively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And we're going to have 3 speakers. Each of the speakers will talk for about 5 minutes in a way of sparking discussion. And then we're going to open the floor to discuss with everyone else here. So please keep your ideas or comments once you raise them to about 1 minute. And that way we can make sure that we have time to discuss these and give everyone the chance to speak. You can use the raise hand function. If you click on the participants tab, you'll see there's a raise hand function, and then wait for me to call your name before speaking. So let's get right into those speakers that we have today. I'd like to welcome Mr. Aaron Tang. Aaron's a PhD student in the ANU Fenner School of Environment and Society, and he's going to discuss the broad context of greenhouse gas removal, including why it is necessary, governance issues, some of the most promising technologies, and his ideas for implementation in practice. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. So let's get started. So then, as Paul said, we've come to a point now where ambitious and unprecedented emissions reductions are not going to be enough. We have to take carbon out of the atmosphere. How can we do this? Well, we can build a bunch of fans which suck carbon dioxide directly out the air. So this is known as direct air capture. Instead of building artificial trees, we can also just plant real ones. So trees can take in a lot of carbon dioxide. The forest-rich Bhutan, for instance, takes in more carbon dioxide than it emits. We can use a process known as bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So then due to photosynthesis, plants take in carbon and turn it into more plant. We can burn these plants for energy. But we can capture the carbon that's released, hence the closed domes. And if we store that carbon underground, that's greenhouse gas removal. We can also burn biomass to create something. We can also burn biomass to create a charcoal known as biochar. So this can be used as a soil amendment to increase soil health and soil carbon. We can also fertilize the ocean with iron. So phytoplankton are these small things which live in the ocean, which take in carbon dioxide over the course of their lifetime. So when they die, they sink to the deep ocean where carbon can be stored over a long period of time. They like iron, so more iron means more phytoplankton, which means more carbon removal. There's also the question of whether we want to use the carbon we're pulling out for other uses, so carbon utilization. This is Sophia Hamlin-Wang, based here in Canberra, and Gaurav Sant, based at UCLA in the US. Both lead companies that can turn carbon dioxide into concrete. So in the future, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, instead of being a wicked collective action problem, could actually be a valuable economic resource. But as much as we look towards the future, we also have to look towards the past. So this is a kerosene lamp. These are very special because the kerosene lamp had one of the fastest technological transitions we have on record. It took roughly 50 years from being a niche innovation to achieving broad use. Now, this is a relatively simple technological innovation. Its main competition was candles, no contest there. Broader, more complex, and more politicized system changes are going to take a lot longer. This implies that it's necessary to research and develop greenhouse gas removal as fast as possible. Development across multiple sectors at large scales needs to happen at an unprecedented pace. But these are also controversial because of potential biophysical and political side effects. We don't exactly know, for instance, what putting a bunch of iron in the ocean is going to do to marine ecosystems. Expansion of bioenergy crops can compromise food and water security. There's also the possibility that even introducing greenhouse gas removal as a potential option can deter actors from ambitious mitigation or adaptation efforts. So there are also very, very good reasons why we don't want to be developing greenhouse gas removal as fast as possible. Given these potential risks, the nature of the research landscape is quite alarming. So this is a breakdown of research in negative emissions. Most research is in the natural and agricultural sciences. The social science contribution in red is tiny. Humanities doesn't even show up. In fact, only 5.4% of papers in the field address institutions and governance. Greenhouse gas removal isn't just about figuring out how a specific technology or intervention is going to work. Broader dynamics like policy, politics, and industry are key determinants of research and implementation success. Look at how special interests in politics have derailed the transition to renewable energy. So my main message today is that a lot more diverse research is needed. Technology is important, definitely, but so are people, politics, and society. This is a really, really young field, so actions we take now can shape research in core directions for decades to come. That's it for me. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And that's a fantastic introduction to Professor Penny King from the Research School of Earth Sciences. And Penny's going to provide an overview of greenhouse gas removal research projects across the ANU, because I think, Aaron, you are right. We need a lot more research to actually make this happen.
Penny, you are on
Jenny, you must be muted.
Unmute.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I was really interested to hear what Aaron was saying about the statistics around publications. I got some data from Claire Di Castello-McKay in the Climate Change Institute, and this is what ANU looks like in terms of researchers interested in negative emissions. And it does mirror what Aaron just told us, that there's a lot of people in science and engineering undertaking these kinds of studies. But you will see that there's a significant number from the College of Asia Pacific, Arts and Social Science, Law, Business and Economics at the ANU, who are also involved in looking at CO2 negative emissions. So I think that's actually a real strength that we have that significantly larger area of researchers than Aaron just showed for the publications. Because science was so large, I'm going to show a zoom in of what that looks like. And so hopefully you can see that, and the Zoom pictures are not blocking things. So you'll see that there's fairly equal division amongst Research School of Biology in blue, Fenner School, Research School of Earth Sciences, and Research School of Chemistry based on this data, which is from 2017, so potentially out of date, but I don't think it's probably shifted very much. Okay, so there are active researchers, and as Paul Duldig said, 450. I actually only looked at about 100, and so I'm feeling like maybe there are a lot that I wasn't certain of. I'll just tell you about some highlights. The first being Justin Borovitz and Elko Rowling and Michael Elwood's work on CO2 sequestration using some of the techniques that Aaron just discussed. Zhongyu Yin in RSC is looking at sustainable catalysis development where CO2 is captured. And then Anna Herring and Adrian Shepherd are looking at mineral carbonation to create building products along the lines of the group in Canberra that Aaron also mentioned. Fiona Beck is looking at solar-driven photocatalytic conversion of atmospheric CO2, and here are some of her results showing reactants going to products. You can see a change. And then Aaron talked about some of the technological transitions and the social aspects of climate change and carbon reuse. And there's a large group at Crawford with Beck, Colvin, Frank Jotzo and Llewellyn Hughes in that. So finally, my final example comes from engineering, where there's an ambitious project led by Wojciech Lipinski, Larry Liu and Shannon Wang, as well as John Pye, to look at CO2 capture integrated with solar thermal, so refrigeration, to examine new ways of sequestering CO2, using that CO2 for agriculture and renewable fuels. So that's just scratching the surface of a very diverse and large group at ANU. And what I'm hoping is that in the questions and discussion afterwards, you can tell us about other areas that haven't been covered here and areas of future interest so that we can grow how we do our research in this area at ANU. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Penny. That was really good background. And I do think that ANU should become, given that we're really into this below zero stuff now, and it's got a lot of support from way up high in the university, it should become the university that's known for negative emissions research. So this is a really important meeting today to start to think about that as well. I'd like now to introduce Professor Mark Howden, who you will know is the director of the Climate Change Institute. Mark will discuss how he sees greenhouse gas removal fitting into ANU below zero. He's going to discuss priority areas for research, potential funding, and integration of research and operations. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Ros. And before I start off with the below zero, I should actually say congratulations for your Optus ANU Centre of Excellence announcement today. So even though it wasn't apparent in the material that's come out, this was actually Rosalind's idea, and Rosalind drove it right through the process. And so I think you deserve really significant plaudits for that. And of course, being able to stop fires quickly also has greenhouse gas implications. So it's leaving trees unburnt, etc. So I think that's a really great credit to you, Ros, and I hope that other people recognise, you know, your involvement from the very idea, the germ of that idea that you had. That's great.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I really do hope we can stop those bushfires and stop all those greenhouse gases happening. But thank you so much for your recognition. Yeah,
it's a pleasure. So I'll cover really quickly some aspects in relation to you know, greenhouse gas removal, negative emissions technologies, etc. And of course, this is actually a much more challenging area than things like putting PV on roofs or swapping over gas heaters to heat pumps, which are, you know, existing technologies, very well-known pathways to usage, understood economics, etc., etc. And so you know, this is actually a more challenging area in most respects. However, there's one area where we do have a fair handle on how to absorb greenhouse gases into various systems, and that's in our natural systems. So the work that was mentioned from Penny with Justin Borovitz and others. And so one of the challenges there, of course, is that we don't have huge land holdings at ANU, and we do have some small ones like Spring Valley Farm and some of our other locations down at Kyola and up at Siding Springs, but they're not huge areas. And realistically, when you want to store a lot of carbon, you do need quite large areas of land. But nevertheless, there is a question about how can we best use our existing land resources and possibly expand them through things like philanthropic trust donations. And of course, if we're going to do that, we want to be really good at not only storing that carbon, but actually being able to account for the storage of that carbon. And that accounting for storage of that carbon was actually one of the 5 topics on the roadmap, reducing the costs of measuring carbon sequestration and soil carbon. So if we're going to do that, of course, that has to be implemented within the existing frameworks within the university. So there is an operational sort of aspect of that, and so there's general policies, but they don't really cover that as well as they would, say, solar PV on roofs, which comes in under the Campus and Buildings Requirements Manual or the Campus Energy Master Plan. So we have to do some institutional development, I think, to make this happen more effectively. Now, the area that I think ANU is more likely to contribute in terms of negative emissions in other areas of work is about the carbon capture and use elements. So both Penny and Aaron also mentioned this. So this is where we capture carbon dioxide from various sources, including direct from the atmosphere, and we convert that into usable product. So things like polymers or building materials, the things that Sophia Hamlin-Wang's doing. And this is a way of removing those gases from the atmosphere, but instead of treating that as the CO2 as a waste product, we treat it as a resource. And so we make something of high value, if possible, out of that. And so not necessarily be driven by prices on carbon and taxes or other sort of similar policy instruments, but actually by the inherent value of the product that we produce. And I think ANU has got a lot of capability. Penny mentioned some of that in her talk, but there's more that's sitting out there in ANU. And we're currently engaging with Monash University on an ARC transformational hub, industrial transformation hub proposal. And they've asked us to lead up essentially the policy, market development, governance aspects of that. And so we're working with 3 other universities to develop that proposal as we speak. And so hopefully we'll have a meeting of the relevant players in ANU over the next few days. But of course, that's just one project, and we need to build this portfolio of work into a much bigger, more coherent thing, maybe akin to that diagram of Wojciech's that Penny showed up before. And so I think that's a really important part, is moving into the research, but also the opportunity of moving negative emissions or greenhouse gas removal into education. So it's building it into courses, into topics, and possibly even developing a specific course on negative emissions, which brings together capability across the university, and as well possibly offerings to the policy world and industry world through professional short courses. And so by doing this, we can possibly integrate that research with the teaching and with operational activities as these technologies move into broader use. Thanks, Ros. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was another great introduction. In fact, I don't know how you clap on Zoom, but perhaps if everyone could give the speakers, unmute for a second and give the speakers a hand, I think that would be good. Oh, I see you clap like that. Okay. Well, anyway, that's what we kind of mean. You get the message. And hopefully now you have many ideas about questions that you'd like to ask. So I'm just going to remind you about the instructions, about how you do give questions. The first is please raise your hand by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of your screen. Can everyone raise their hand so that I know that they know how to do that? Just everyone raise their hand now. I don't want anyone to miss out because they don't know where the participants tab is at the bottom of the screen. I don't see any hands, do I? Have we got hands? Yep. Okay, thank you. Good. So that's the first thing. The next thing is, because we don't have much time left, please keep your comments and ideas very brief so that everyone has a chance to contribute. And the next is, if you don't want to speak up, there's a big alternative with Zoom where you can submit your ideas through the chat function for those people that don't really want to speak up, but they still want to submit their ideas. And then the other thing is, if someone has an idea, we're not really into criticizing ideas, but we're into building on ideas and improving ideas. So please don't make this a positive, constructive session. And the other thing is, just because everyone's from different disciplines, don't use any jargon from your own discipline. Try and speak in plain English. So do I have any questions? I think I can see someone raising their finger on the screen. That's fine. No other instructions. So Jacob, would you like to ask your question or make your comment?
Hi, thank you. I'll try and be quick. I've got a lot of notes. Quickly on Mark's comment about ANU's limited land holdings. There are some campaigns being run by, for example, Halfcut and in collaboration with Future Super to buy back areas of old growth forests and to rewild some areas like this. So some campaign like that could be of use for the ANU. If there was some sort of innovative sort of fundraising campaign internally, that could be a way to extend our land holdings. What are my other notes? So I note that there's an enormous community here at the ANU, and my first thought is, well, perhaps I'm missing something, but it would be great to see that more actively energized. And so things like more regular, if informal meetings or local conferences could be a great way to keep things moving and also recruit a lot of students to the effort, which could even expand into international, indeed online conferences in the near term. And it would be really interesting to see a map of the potential and progress on some of these research efforts if possible. I'm not in a position to take a lead on any of these, but I'm more than happy to put in legwork if that's possible. And so I'd be happy to hear from people. I'd also like to recommend a couple of resources for those who are curious about this area, as me, as a bit of an outsider. The first is this book. It's called Drawdown.
Can't see it properly, Jacob.
Okay, I'll post a link in the chat to this report and to a report that was assembled by the Royal Society surveying greenhouse gas removal opportunities. And finally, a little piece of self-promotion. I'm going to be finishing my PhD in experimental physics sometime soon, and I'm looking to move into this field. So if you need a guy who knows stuff about measurement and experimentation or scientific computing, machine learning, mathematics, theoretical physics, then I'm your guy. I'll put my contact details in the list, sorry, in the chat with those resources. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in this project.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I think we'll move on just for time, but I think that was a very welcome offering, and we look forward to seeing what those books are as well. I've now worked out how these hands work. So on to Caitlin Sapiras, if you would please ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, oh, is it working? Yeah. I'm from the School of Science Communication, so my question's more socially science oriented. But I was going to sort of point out that like the social science research indicates that there's much greater endorsement from the broader public generally of solutions that are more natural. So like things like, you know, reforestation as opposed to direct air capture that Aaron talked about. So assuming that negative emission technologies are like a good thing in the first instance, which is obviously contestable, but as ANU kind of looks towards, and the Climate Change Institute as well, knowing that the reputation of both these institutions are kind of inalienable, when we look at like research priorities and eventual ANU deployment, how like looking at the way we're going to manage the promise of some of these non-natural solutions, like direct air capture already looks more promising than afforestation, as well as managing the backlash that those sorts of technologies are going to stoke, as well as the potential diminution of mitigation efforts that these technologies are going to potentially promote, especially as an institution like ours kind of legitimizes them.
I'm just wondering if Mark would like to respond to that, or if we should keep going.
Yep. Yeah, look, I can. I think we should, you know, respond after questions where there's something to deal with. So thanks, Caitlin. It's really useful input there. And so yes, there are different preferences with different groups, and the economics vary as well, you know, massively with these things. The trade-offs vary. So planting trees isn't a free good, for example. Is that, you know, planting trees use lots of water. If we planted lots of trees in the Murray-Darling Basin, we'd have a much drier Murray-Darling Basin than we already do. So at least whilst the trees are actively growing. So we need to be very aware of the full range of costs and benefits and co-benefits that arise with the different options. And the way I'd see it at the moment is that we need all of these solutions in terms of greenhouse gas removals, because we actually don't know enough about the ones that can scale up in different circumstances. And when we look at them, all of those solutions that each of them can possibly take out about 1 billion tonnes or maybe 2 billion tonnes out of the atmosphere a year if it was done well and scaled up. But we're currently producing about 50 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases in carbon dioxide equivalents across the globe. So I think we actually are in a situation where we say a priori, we actually need lots and lots of solutions. There's going to be no single solution. And this is not the time to be picking winners, which the sort of government seems to love to do at the moment. This is actually a time to explore systematically a whole range of different options, and then build on the ones which actually look prospective. But this is not the time to just start narrowing down on one or two of them.
Thank you, Mark. I think I would agree with you as well, that it's a very good question. I'd like now, is Phil Taylor still wanting to ask a question?
So Mark basically just answered everything I was going to ask.
Okay, then you don't have anything further to add then, Philip?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, then. All right. I would like to ask Wojciech to make his comment or ask his question.
Thank you, Roslyn. So I have some ideas that some of them refer directly to ANU and how to make our campus better accounting for its action and emissions, and some others, of course, are more general. So the first idea is many nations on this planet have the so-called national debt clock, and it's showing instantaneously on the website the financial situation of a country. So perhaps ANU could have its CO2 emissions clock, and that would be, putting the facts right away in front of everybody's eyes, instantaneous emissions and accumulated emissions counted from some reference starting point. The second idea is about investing or developing some offsetting programs. So we heard here about afforestation, which is I personally like forestry a lot, and I think it's a great means. But as Mark said, as long as there is water and it doesn't come with other negative aspects. But there are these days there are also some companies trying to build devices to demonstrate direct CO2 capture from the air, and perhaps investing in shares of some of these companies or developing own spin-off companies here at ANU based on IP developed at ANU would be an option to consider. And finally, ANU is located in the ACT government, and the ACT government is also looking for options to minimize waste, minimize emissions, go 100% renewable. Perhaps together with the local government, we could think of some of these offset schemes when we think about local reductions of CO2 here related to the campus. And in the more, the broader scheme of things, I think discussing some options to developing new technologies beyond those of, say, carbon engineering, Climeworks, or the artificial tree at the Arizona State University. I think we have enough potential at the ANU to go up with some new technological innovations. And of course, that would require some discussion. Mark mentioned, let's don't pick up any winner now, but that could be some contribution to solving this through commercialization eventually on the global markets of some solutions from Australia.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. So I'll just quickly respond, and then I might ask the panel, Mark or other people on the panel would like to respond. But I think having a clock would be great, and I'd like to ask Mark if that's something that he thinks we could achieve, something that everyone can see all of the time. I think that would be a really fantastic idea. Just on trees come up a few times. There has been quite a lot of work done, which I was involved with in the Deep Dark Ages, looking at the trade-offs of having trees in the landscape. And so while in some places, if you put them in the wrong place, they can take water out of the basin. If you put them in the right place, they can reduce salinity, they can encourage biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very important to design where you put trees very carefully on a catchment and landscape scale so that you can get the benefits of the trees without the, and minimize the downsides. Mark, do you want to talk about any of the ideas that Wojciech's brought up? I thought they were all really good ideas.
Yeah, sure. I can cover some of those. So in terms of the clock, we've actually just been talking with facilities and services, and they've said to us that they're getting an ANU emissions dashboard sorted out, and this potentially will have sort of building oriented information. So they're working with AGL to get energy use, etc., for specific buildings. And also, the broader emissions, which sometimes are, not quite as well known or dynamically known as some of the energy-based emissions, which are recorded very, on a very short time frames. But that is something which is sort of being thought about, and how we do it, and there's other things that, there's lots and lots of things which have to be put into place to have a dashboard which is actually representative of what's going on, and then thinking about the multiple ways in which we can use that information for informing building operations, etc., as well as people's behaviours. Because I think it's really important to not just focus on people's behaviours, but also to push up into the system, into the institutional changes that are needed as well. In terms of offset programs, we have done that, and we've done some scoping of different offset programs and the costs, etc., of them. And even though ANU's total budget, once you take out the renewable energy electricity component, so that's effectively a zero emissions element there in the ACT, but for other facilities like Kyola or Siding Springs, that's actually coal-fired, essentially coal-fired sort of electricity, or partially coal-fired, and so that has a much bigger emissions budget which we need to take into account. But in terms of offset programs, typically at the moment the cost per tonne is something between $15 and $20. We're producing about 30,000 tonnes in a non-COVID year. That's sort of the numbers we're coming up with, which still means you got to pay $500,000 or more out in terms of offset costs. And we all know that $500,000 aren't easy to find just at the moment. So that's one issue. The other one is, of course, if you're offsetting it, it's a bit of a moral hazard. If you can offset cheaply, then you don't actually do much about changing your own behaviours, changing your own systems. And so we have to think through these, and there's plenty of critiques of offset programs, by academics, including ANU academics, and so we need to be careful of those. The idea of spin-off companies, accelerators, absolutely, and I think as some of these technologies develop a bit further, we'd look to identify, how we could do those spin-offs in ways where there's not only an opportunity to scale up, but also return investment back to ANU. And the last comment, Wojciech, was on the ACT government, and I've actually been talking with the current ACT government, which may not last for very much longer, but I've been talking with them for 3 or more years about negative emissions, and they are interested, but they need something which is a bit more concrete than, I shouldn't use that word, a bit more solid than we've got at the moment in terms of some of the the new research. But there is possibility, depending on the nature of the government that's returned, that they could actually do something quite substantial in this area, like a negative emissions research centre or something like that, and be party to that. And so certainly if they had viable propositions to reduce greenhouse gas footprints, they'd be thinking about them. So I've talked about with the new suburbs, using a combination of low or no emissions housing, strategic tree planting, soil carbon enhancement, etc. And they can see that these things could splice together in a nice way in some of their new developments.
That sounds great, Mark. That would be excellent. Penny or Aaron, did you want to make any other comments about all those suggestions, which I thought were all very good?
I think Mark covered it. Thank you.
Oh, Penny, I think you've still got some stuff on, you know, what we're doing with Anna, and so those are ideas which I think you can respond with.
Oh, sure, I can talk about those unless Anna's here herself. So Anna Herring and Adrian Shepherd are looking at the ways to make CO2 into concrete and examining what's called mineral carbonation as a way of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and then storing it, hopefully in the longer term, in a useful product. Oh, and I'm working with them on this as well. And so we're moving forward with that with a series of students. And also Wojciech has worked a lot in that area with some of his students.
So, Roslyn, you are on mute.
Oh, would you like to respond to Mark, or should we move on to the next question? I think.
So if I could have just one comment, perhaps with regard to the offset programs, I believe before COVID, a large fraction of emissions came from ANU academics and staff traveling. So last year I attended a World Solar Congress in Chile, and this was around the unfortunate time when there were demonstrations, and also the big climate meeting was postponed there because, or cancelled because of that political situation. But I did have, I did share my guilt of flying there with generation of a lot of CO2 emissions with the university executives. And by then I proposed that we could add some internal carbon tax or additional overhead on our travel tickets, so that this funding goes to some offset programs similarly to the carbon offset, for example, applied by Qantas. And if that could be quantified in some way, and we could trace the pathway of the money raised that way and invested, perhaps it would demonstrate broadly in the country that it can be a successful story. You know, once there was carbon tax in Australia and now it's gone. So my idea is a little bit, let's go back and maybe reconsider it.
Thanks very much, Wojciech. Well, I'm going to move on now to Nick Killerby-Smith, who has a question.
Hi. Apologies to begin with if some of this was mentioned very early on. I missed the first few minutes, but mostly a few comments rather than specific questions. There's been afforestation mentioned a few times, whereas I'd probably point out that Australia has one of the highest land clearing rates in the world. So reforestation negates a lot of the issues that were mentioned with that. So you don't have issues with, you know, water being overly drawn out of catchments and any other ecological issues you might have there. It's sort of a two-pronged approach. You're both sequestering carbon that way, and you're also rewilding and protecting native species if you look for reforestation. But my understanding is also that there isn't enough land on the world to sufficiently sequester the amount of carbon we're putting out. So we do need other approaches as well, obviously. And I suppose with any kind of tree planting schemes or reforestation efforts, the land that ANU actually possesses is, of course, one of the main concerns, and how you can sort of offset that. My personal view is that if we can manage to eliminate most of our carbon emissions through, you know, renewable energy and other means, and then we're looking to get to negative carbon emissions for ANU, that my view is that, you know, offset programs are sort of morally justifiable in that way, because it's a way to sort of undo past damage rather than just, you know, sending off money somewhere else while you continue to not change your behaviors. Yeah, so that's my comments that I had.
Thank you very much, Nick. Does anyone, Aaron, you haven't had a chance to respond yet, and you may have some ideas on some of those points. Oh, you're muted, Aaron.
I think, yeah, broadly in agreement that we shouldn't just, I mean, yeah, the problem with offsets, yeah, it is right. You're right, you know, you can just pay off and not have any system changes. I mean, when it comes to greenhouse gas removal, we also have to recognize that, you know, we want to go for the easiest, cheapest solutions first up, right? And that's just straight up emission reduction, so changing to renewables. So as much, so, I mean, so as important as greenhouse gas removal is, the priority is still very much solar, renewables. After that, offsets or other measures, sure, go ahead. But priority is still emissions reduction.
Thank you. So I'd like now to move to Kirsty Yates, who has a question. Kirsty?
Thanks, Rosalind. I guess probably feeding off some of the comments earlier about the lack of land that ANU has to potentially draw down. So recognising, of course, we have to reduce emissions, but we can't achieve net zero without drawdown as well, and we need to go beyond that. An old boss of mine that I worked for quite a few years used to talk about capacity for Australia to export food. We can feed 100 million, but if we export our knowledge, we can feed 1 billion. And I think ANU is so well placed in terms of the breadth of knowledge that it has, particularly with the ecological environmental sciences, the earth sciences, biology, the social and political sciences, and the whole spectrum there, that if we can, you know, we may not be able to raise money to actually pay for offsets and all of that sort of thing, but the opportunity that ANU has to be an enabler for scaling up pathways for carbon drawdown across our community, whether that's, you know, with farmers or with people that are connected to the ANU community, I think is a really massive opportunity. And one of the benefits of ANU is that because it's not a traditional agricultural university, it's not coming with some of the baggage that we already see in agricultural landscapes and around some of the social change. And there's so many farmers that are really excited to be working with people that are coming from a broader, more inter or transdisciplinary perspective around you know, nature-based carbon drawdown, about building resilient systems, about adaptation, and wanting to look more broadly than just how do we sustain agricultural production into the future. So I guess I'm really interested in seeing how ANU leverages the opportunity to draw down carbon, not just to offset what we've directly released, but to really drive that cultural change across the community and enable that.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. Does anyone would anyone like to respond to that before we go on to the next question? Mark, you're muted, Mark.
Great points, Kirsty. I absolutely agree with you in terms of exporting knowledge, and it's, you know, all sorts of different types of knowledge, including governance. And, you know, in the past, I've often said that one of our most important exports was governance to our region, and we're now not doing that because we've pulled that funding largely from DFAT. I think, you know, it's exactly right. But one other way in which we export knowledge is through international students, and you know, that's looking a bit dicey at the moment. And so you know, I think we, you know, in that sense, we need to think broadly about how we export that knowledge and what the things that we teach at university are. And that's why I think bringing below zero systemically into the ANU experience actually is a good way of actually doing that export.
Could I just say, sorry, when I was talking about export, I was thinking more beyond that, the direct ANU community, so into the Australian community as well. So so not just internationally, but I think, and for me, I think that's where the real opportunity for us in terms of climate change and the capacity to scale up by testing it in our community and then enabling that to spread more broadly.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. I think that's a great idea, and I'm sure that Mark will be following up with you after this event to look into that further. I now have another question from Lizzie Holly.
Thank you so much for holding this session. I had some input into how we could implement the little everyday things into our ANU community to help reach below zero. I'm a student myself, so I feel like this would be more achievable for someone like me. I'm not too sure how many people watch the ABC documentary Fight for Planet A, but when I saw that, I felt really inspired with how much little things like turning off lights, PowerPoints, heaters could actually have on a school, and even on a university level, that'd be pretty awesome. And I think that if we were encouraged to do that by the ANU, we would feel more connected with the actual idea of going to zero emissions, because I feel like if we just hear all this amazing research, which is pretty cool, we sit there not really knowing what we can do. So if we were encouraged to do little things like that, I feel like we would know that we were actually having an impact as well as everybody else. Yeah, that would be my idea.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Mark, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, look, we've actually had a session like this on behaviours, and perhaps Claire is in a good position to summarise messages from that.
Yeah, Lizzie, I think that's really, really important, and it's a really good point. One of the things that we talked about at the behaviour session was actually developing, changing social norms about the way we behave, and actually building that into an ANU identity, so that through identifying with ANU as a kind of green, climate-friendly place, it also encourages us to change our behaviour. But certainly we're engaging with lots of behaviour change experts, and we're engaging with people in the residences, and this is something that we will definitely build into the strategy to try and make sure that individual behaviour change is sort of strongly weaved through everything we do, as well as it change at an institutional level as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire. We don't have any more hands up, so please put your hands up. But there is a very interesting comment that Ian Fry has made on the chat, and I wonder, Ian, whether you would like to talk to that comment. If you're still here. Oh yeah, he's still here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was just a comment about this offsetting schemes. We have to be very careful about how we account for those. There are serious problems of double accounting. You know, that whatever we do, is there somebody else going to account for that as well? And it also applies to the issue of afforestation and reforestation. I've certainly been involved in the accounting framework for the Kyoto Protocol for a long time, and there are serious issues around how do you account for non-permanence. You know, trees grow for a certain period of time and then they die or are burnt down or whatever. And you're offsetting the sequestration against an immediate emission from somewhere else. That's how the accounting system works. So, you know, how do you deal with that sort of a reversal of sequestration? So it is much more complicated than just saying, let's plant more trees. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. I just wonder if anyone was interested in making a comment on Ian's experience that he's just told us about, and whether it's changed their views on these types of things. Is any comments?
Well, perhaps I can add one comment in relation to what Ian just said. We heard about afforestation and reforestation, but I think it is equally important to prevent as much as we can any deforestation. And currently that's a carbon source to the atmosphere, perhaps not necessarily in Australia, although the bushfire was such a reason, but internationally deforestation is reaching large scale for short-term economic benefits, and that's an issue. I think this ANU could also contribute to this space, perhaps by contributing to some international efforts to stop deforestation, for example, in Latin America.
Yeah, I'm not sure how aligned that is with what we're doing, but I would think that talking with facilities and services about not knocking down any more trees on ANU to build buildings might be a good start as well. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Any other comments? We actually do have another question, so I might move on to hear from Robert Tulip.
Hi, I'm just interested in the global situation and what it means in terms of negative emissions for achieving climate stability, and the long-term climate stability was at 280 parts per million of CO2, and if you add in all of the extra equivalents, we're up something like 500 ppm now. And does the planet have to go back down below 300 in order to have a stable climate? And what does that imply about the sort of scale of negative emissions that's required for climate stability?
Mark, would you like to respond, or Penny? Or?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a really sort of interesting question. I mean, one answer to that, of course, is, you know, we can have a stable climate if we level off at 900 parts per million. It's just a very different climate and different world from the one we've had in. So if the idea is, you know, leveling off carbon dioxide concentrations at something which sort of reduces the damage associated with climate change, you know, at a global scale, governments have decided that's well below 2 degrees, or if possible 1.5, and to get to sort of stick to 1.5, we haven't got much room to play with. So, you know, roughly speaking, there's probably another 60 parts per million that we can add to the atmosphere and still stick with 1.5. And so, you know, if we do that, then over a period of time, things will stabilize, but not things like sea level rise. So sea level rise will go up for centuries just on the basis of what we've already done. You know, Greenland will continue to melt for quite some time on the basis of what we've already done. And so there's, you know, there's some things which are going to stabilize relatively quickly, and some which take a long time to stabilize. So for example, there's some work at ANU done earlier this year by Nerily Abrams, who indicated that the changes in the Indian Ocean dipole would stop almost immediately once we took our foot off the climate change accelerator, and whereas changes in El Nino will continue for many decades as a function of, you know, once we stop emissions. So there's no simple answer to that, but the quicker we reduce our emissions, the harder we reduce our emissions, the less change we get.
Thank you. Will, did you want to comment on that? Will Howard, you're muted.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Mark's comment and answer that question. And just to build on it, to say, yes, the climate ultimately would stabilize at in a different state. But I also want to say that some of the disruptions we're experiencing are because it's such a rapid transition. And that's also disruptive. So I think that's just another point, because we're pushing the system much faster than it's likely to have ever been pushed in the geological past that we know about. So I think that's another reason that the earlier and the quicker we can reduce emissions, the less we're pushing the system. And that's part of part of the disruption that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Will. Thank you very much for that contribution. And I'm hoping, Robert, that you're starting to better understand the responses to the question you asked. Have we got time for one more question? There is one from Nick. Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to ask what Ian's recommendations would be based on his experience, because I suppose my understanding broadly was that most mechanical carbon sequestration methods are broadly underdeveloped for the scales that we'd need. And, you know, things like reforestation are cheap and scalable right now. And it's easy to sort of like overly academicize the problem, make it, you know, some optimal problem we need to solve, but it is also a time critical problem. And if something isn't scalable, you know, quickly, then we're not actually achieving much by sequestering carbon long term. So yeah, I guess I'd ask what his recommendations would be for paths forward.
Ian?
Well, that's as part of a longer discussion, but I you know, there's a cautionary note about relying on reforestation or afforestation, that you are removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but you're doing it only on a temporary basis. And so if you're offsetting that against existing emissions, then you're at some stage going to have positive emissions again. So, you know, we have to be very careful about how we account for that fact. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've just got time for one more question that I will ask Aaron about the diversity of research and whether he thinks we should be doing more different types of research at ANU and how we might make that happen. And perhaps Penny might want to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so then, all right, so then Mark mentioned that we're going to need to have a wide mix of different solutions. Each solution is going to have a bunch of different problems in different places, and different actors are going to be able to address these solutions differently. When it comes to accounting, for example, countries like Australia have pretty good accounting measures. If you're a developing country, why do you want to spend more and more on accounting instead of, let's say, emissions reduction or other more substantive issues? We're going to need what's called a negative emissions cocktail, right? A mix of lots of different things. That in itself calls for diversity in terms of technological research. In terms of the diversity of broader research and different types of research, lots of the core assumptions or issues and premises in the field are not really addressed. A big one that I'm doing I'm trying to figure out in my PhD is, can this even be done fast enough? So then, if we're talking the IPCC timeline for 1.5 degrees, we'll have to reach net zero globally at around 2050, 2060. So that means not only reducing emissions, but also having to offset by virtue of just need, having to offset spaces, industries which you can't decarbonize. So aviation, concrete, steel, for instance. We'll need a lot of everything everywhere. In terms of how to operationalize that, especially at the ANU level, look, teaching, without a doubt. And when it comes to the academic project level, it's difficult because professors and academics rely on grant money. I think students, undergrad, masters level, my message to students is that, well, this is a gold mine because it's such an important topic. It's so understudied, and there's so many things which just aren't given attention. If you're a student, and look, I was in this position as well, like a few years ago, this is something to jump on because it's interesting, it's important. I think it should be at the course level across schools. This type of research needs to be encouraged. There's no better time for it, really.
Thanks very much. And Aaron, Penny, did you want to add to that before we wrap up?
Yep, I see that we're very short on time, but I agree with everything that Aaron just said, and I'm really excited to hear Mark mention the possibility of courses, and I think he also mentioned workshops and conferences, and I really do think that kind of interaction would be fantastic. We've had some of these run by the Climate Change Institute, and every time I come away feeling enriched. I think that the Grand Challenge scheme and the grants did pull us together and have people talking about multiple ways to address climate change. I think that workshops would lead into that kind of dialogue again. And I'm really excited to hear about the potential of courses or micro-credentials as well as a way of moving forward. And finally, the students, as Aaron just said, sometimes academics are writing grants and are doing other things, and so it's really important to have that enthusiasm that students give us and keep pushing us along.
Thanks very much, Penny. So I thank you everyone on the panel and everyone that asked a question and everyone that listened. I think it was a great session, and I think there's a lot of ideas that can be discussed further, and I really look forward to seeing what we can do with some of the ideas that came up today. I'd like to remind everyone there are actually 3 more workshops, including the next one next Tuesday on the 6th of October on integrating below zero operations with research and teaching, just as we were just kind of discussing at 12:30 to 1:30. Of course, you're welcome to keep sharing your ideas on Idea Note, including the ones we discussed today. And I'm sure others would like to interact with these on this platform. And Juliet's showing us the platform right now, so you know how you can do that. If you email belowzero@anu.edu.au, then you can get the link if you can't find it in the chat window. So thank you, everybody. In particular, thank you, Mark and Claire and Juliet, for organising today. I think it's great, and I think it's fantastic the work you're doing in making sure that ANU reaches below zero emissions through a whole range of different approaches that are starting to look very exciting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Penny and Aaron. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for moderating so well.
Thank you. Great job, Ros. Cheers.